So hi, my name is Graham Bednash. I've got the lovely title of Vice President of Brand for a company called Abcam, which is in the biotechnology area, one of the biggest, most sort of pioneering companies in what they call life science, which is we make antibodies and work very closely with scientists around the world to figure out cures for different kinds of cancer and different kinds of neuroscientific issues. And my job is to help build their reputation, make people love them, make people want to work with them, attract great employees. And I'm responsible for creative, for PR, and for brand strategy. I've been here a year. Before that, I was running marketing for the whole of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Google. And my responsibility there was helping people understand why they should buy a Chromebook, why they should choose Android instead of iPhone, why they should be searching more. Can you believe it? But it's true. Google want people to search more often, or at least discover some of the really interesting tools and tricks that you can do on Google search. So I worked there for about 8 years and learned a shed load. So many new things that I discovered and learned that I hadn't done before, which was wonderful. Before that, I was working in advertising. So I switched from the advertising side to being the client and commissioning creative work, whereas before that, my job was primarily working with big companies like Ronseal. I worked on that campaign. You may have heard of it. Does what it says on the tin. I worked on some other really famous campaigns for Channel 4 and various others, where my job was to figure out what the client wanted to say and find the most interesting, imaginative way of saying it on social, on TV, on press, advertising, and so forth. So I worked in a bunch of ad agencies before working at Google. So that's me, really, in a minute.
Yeah, that's very well summarized. I'm sure there's a lot more that you could say. But obviously from our previous conversations that we've had, and the reason why you're speaking to Circl and to our community is that throughout your career, even though there's been this advertising focus, you've also had a very strong focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and obviously with what you're doing right now with the company that you're working with on purpose, and business playing a role in making society and the world a better place. So just tell us a little bit about the work that you've done at Google and that you're doing now in that space.
Being a leader now in any job is absolutely about ensuring that your team is as diverse as possible, and you create as much inclusivity and sense of belonging in that team as you can as a leader. And clearly all of us have got a learning about this as we go. And it's very important, I think, as a leader, that you have to have a very growth mindset to make sure that you are developing yourself to sort of develop as the world changes. But for me, being a great inclusive leader is about being a great coach. And personally, the best leaders I've met in my career have always been great coaches. And, it's hard whenever to be a really great leader, because your job is to enable others to do incredible things. And sometimes you're working with people from different backgrounds that you don't understand because you've never lived in that world, or you're working with people who are more introverted than you are or more extroverted than you are, loads of different types of personalities. And you're trying to create a culture and an environment where everybody succeeds, where everybody feels like they're part of the same team, where everyone feels equal. And that's what I do everything I can to try and do. So, in every single one-to-one that I have with anybody in my team, I make sure I understand how they are. Being an active listener is really, really important. So you're always checking in and making sure they're okay. Being compassionate and understanding what they might be going through in their personal lives might impact their work. But also being clear about goals and objectives, because you're running a company. So you've got to balance the compassion. Well, you've got to always be compassionate, but you've got to balance that with being very clear about what your outcomes are. You've also got to be always checking your bias, because all of us have got biases that we're bringing with us to any meeting or any exchange, or when you're hiring people as well. Of course, that's where the rubber hits the road. So I remember a number of times when we were having what they called calibration meetings at Google, which is to try and figure out how people were doing in their performance. We would always have anti-bias training before the session to make sure that we were checking in on the ways that we saw the world, and to make sure that we were being as inclusive, as compassionate, and understanding of different types of personalities as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting that you kind of reference Google, and it's widely seen as, one of the shining lights in terms of thinking about how to optimize performance, and the fact that inclusion and focusing on anti-bias training and unconscious bias training and things like that was just part of the operational model. Clearly shows that it is a commercial consideration, not just an ethical one. I think quite often people who see, D&I becoming more and more of a focus for businesses are concerned about sort of social washing, or just, sort of CSR, but with a different name and ticking a box. But actually, it sounds like from the work that you've been involved in, and also your description of what great leadership and inclusive leadership looks like, you've got the evidence that shows that it's a commercial necessity to have that type of approach. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, the trouble with D&I as a descriptor is that people think of it as a sort of kind of contemporary way of thinking about underrepresented groups, which I think is just totally wrong. I think the way to think of it is that there's a huge amount of talent out there from many different types of backgrounds of society. Businesses tended to be very biased in the way it's recruited and the way it's rewarded people. That's why it's predominantly a white, male, middle class kind of environment in many, many large companies over the last 20 or so years. Sorry, before that, of course. But the last few years, I think there's a determination to realize that talent comes from everywhere. So business has to change. So it's commercial in the sense that it's very humane, because obviously we're a very multicultural society, but it's commercial because talent is everywhere. So if you're not thinking about that in the right way and ensuring you're hiring from diverse, underrepresented groups, you're not getting the best talent in your company. You're not getting the best ideas.
No, it's super interesting to hear. And one thing you just mentioned there, and one of the things that would be interesting to understand a little bit is, when you started out professionally, having come from a different background to some of the people that you're engaging with, fast forwarding to now, when you've been running advertising for Google, which is a pretty prestigious job in EMEA, and now this amazing groundbreaking work that you're doing in the health sector. How much of your own background do you think, and your own story, compels you to try and make the world of work and the world generally a more equitable place, if at all?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I'm not suggesting at all that I came from a difficult or underprivileged or difficult background. Many people have, lots and lots of people have much harder, starting in much harder circumstances than I did. Mine was more about just feeling a sense of other, that you're not quite in the same group as other people. It wasn't underprivileged in any way. But just to clarify that. But I think to be honest, I think the learning would be, you've got to see it as a good thing rather than a bad thing. You are who you are. You've got to feel good about who you are. And there'll obviously be moments in all our careers where you feel, you've lost your confidence, or you feel not as good. Have a bit of imposter syndrome. You don't think you're as good as other people. And I've certainly had that before. But you've got to sort of, got to push through it. You've got to figure out what you're really good at. Somebody once said to me, which I think is really great advice, is figure out your superpower. Try and really be clear about what you're really brilliant at, and then feed your strengths. Don't focus on your weaknesses. Focus on your strengths, and try and work out what you're great at, and bring that, try and develop that as best as possible. So that's what, my advice to people would be is, what's your superpower? Feel really good about your difference. Don't feel in any way like it's a bad thing being different. It's a great thing being different, because you can add different perspective, and just keep focusing on that and tell people that story.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And I wonder what you would have said your superpower was.
I think my superpower is making complicated things simple, which is very important in advertising and marketing, because everyone's showing you very, very complicated Excel charts and slides with long stories. And I'm always trying to figure out, right, how do you turn that into just a few words to make it super simple? Then it's easier then to tell good stories which is kind of what I have to do, is work with other people to help all of us tell good stories.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes when we talk about the Circl program and how we, connect young people and professionals, and it's around coaching, we need some of your storytelling ability, because it sometimes can be overcomplicated. But it's fantastic advice to focus on your strengths and build that superpower. And I think the reason I was asking about your story and your background, and thank you for clarifying that you don't see yourself as necessarily underrepresented. But so often, I think our community of underrepresented, literally young people who kind of take part in the Circl program, they quite often might question, myself, for example, being a middle class, white, male person, being really passionate and interested in this space. Not question, but just be curious about that, because so often, we talk about needing lived experience to be able to be passionate about something. But I almost think that it's sometimes even more powerful if you aren't from an underrepresented background, but you're still a massive advocate. And that's what, I know you are and have been, which is really interesting. And I also think super uplifting for people who are thinking about the world of work and thinking about the leaders in the world of work. And if there are more and more like you, then surely that's only going to be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the world needs allies. If you're underrepresented, you need allies. You need people who are in positions of power who can change the world. Yeah, it's harder to change the world when you're outside it. So yeah, I mean, people like yourself, me as well. We've got that power. We should use it properly.
So you've given a bit about your story. You've given a bit about your passions, and thank you for talking so clearly about coaching skills and advocating for them. Obviously, that's what the core of the Circl program is, and young people watching this will be interested in and hearing from someone who's been a leader. And you've given a bit of advice about building down and drilling down into your superpower and building on your strength. But if you were to give one more kind of piece of advice just to wrap up, specifically thinking about, right now, today, we are on the brink of, if not already in a recession, coming out of COVID. Young people who've been through our program are coming into a very strange job market, and especially if they had thought previously they might go into tech. That's obviously, in a very difficult and interesting place at the moment. Which is probably quite a sweeping statement, but I think everyone will understand the sentiment. What other one piece of advice would you give to kind of close it off?
You've got to think like an optimist. You just got to be optimistic. I know that sounds trite, but because you will have setbacks. People will be applying for roles and they'll get many, many, many setbacks, many, many refusals. But you've just got to think like Lewis Hamilton. I would really recommend people read Lewis Hamilton on resilience. Because you just think about what that man has gone through his life and his career in terms of like failing and getting back, and that optimism and that resilience he has. If we all had some of that, I think we can all be successful in our own terms, whatever success means to us. But you've got to be optimistic, and you've got to have very, very strong powers of resilience. Those things where what they call those balloon things, you hit them and they keep coming back up again. You've got to be a bit like that, because it will be difficult, but you've got to realize it's difficult for everybody and just keep on going.
It's fantastic advice. Yeah. I think one of the things that's great that you qualified there, because a lot of the time I have conversations, on interviews or with individuals, and they say, you need to be optimistic or you need to be resilient. But then the question is, okay, well, how do I do that? And like practical things like read Lewis Hamilton's book on resilience, like that's a great thing. You may not have any other kind of practical tips that people could do to practice or strengthen the muscle of resilience, but maybe you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, practice resilience. I think that's a really good phrase, Charlie. You've got to practice it. You've got to appreciate that you're not on your own. Other people are going through the same thing. So I think it's a very good idea also to openly try and get a friendship group or something, whether it's on LinkedIn or some other forum on, wherever you go for mates, to sort of share these stories. I can't recommend meditation strongly enough. I think meditation is a really good way as well, just to calm the mind down, because when you are stressed or you're worried, your mind does play bad tricks with you. So I'd really recommend Headspace or one of those apps to kind of calm your brain down, and it just puts you in a better frame of mind. Anyway, there's a bunch of advice, but I would just to give it down to those two things: learn how to be resilient, and think about your mind can be a very destructive force. So meditation or something like that, going out for a walk, going out for a run, doing boxing is a good way of just making sure your mind doesn't overwhelm you. Because, you know, there's reality, but you don't know what the reality is. It's just that the reality is in your head. So you've got to try and control your head.
Yeah, that's really, again, just great practical things to take away. Yeah. Graham, that was really, really fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure your advice will help a lot of people.
I hope so.